Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We have a special guest as usual later on, who I will introduce in a few minutes, but a few things to mention first. As I said before, if you are on Facebook or YouTube, you can click the notifications bell or button just so that you're alerted to future live streams and other Scottish Family Party content. That would be good. So you put comments in during the live stream. Let me just get them up on my screen. We'll try and respond to those as we go through the evening as well. Right, so what's coming up this week? Tomorrow evening, we're having our first ever meeting in the Scottish borders in Jedburgh, no less, at 7:30 p.m. at the Carter's Rest Inn pub. I'm not sure what exactly you call it. It's right next to the Abbey, in any case, in Jedburgh. The Carter's Rest, 7:30 p.m. Tomorrow night. We're lovely to see you. If you're down in that area, I say that's our debut in the borders. Dr. Bruce Scott, who some of you might have seen at the Scottish Family Party conference last year, given a fascinating talk. He'll be there as well. So you can come and meet us there. And Friday next week, not Friday at the end of this week, Friday at the end of next week, we have a meeting in Aberdeen where I will be giving a talk related to the transgender guidance. The title is going to be Parents versus Teachers. So if you're in the northeast area, it would be great to see you in Aberdeen a week on Friday. You'll see details on our social media. And of course, as I always keep mentioning, our conference is coming up on the 13th of November, and tickets are selling very nicely, especially for the dinner in the evening. So do book up soon to secure your place for that. I've mentioned a few features of the conference. I think maybe I haven't mentioned this one quite so much. And that is that we're going to be launching a lot of new literature at the conference. We've got a new book coming out. I think it's probably worth calling it a book rather than a booklet. This is like a 60-page A4 document about sex education, LGBT inclusive education, and transgender issues in Scottish schools. So there's quite a major publication. So we're going to have that ready, printed out, ready for that conference. And so you will get a complimentary copy of that at the conference. And also, I've written a book about Christians in politics. That, as far as I'm aware, is unlike anything that's been written before. If anyone's written something like it before, I haven't come across it. Let's put it that way. So it's talking about all sorts of areas as to why Christians should want to get involved. Then there's a section looking at the reasons some Christians seem to have that, the subtitle is Unmuffling the Prophetic Voice. Because there's various opinions and views and attitudes among Christians that seem to all point in the direction of muffling their voice in the political sphere. Whereas every other group seems to come in arguing its case and its vision for the future of society, Christians often seem reluctant to do that. So I'll look at some of the reasons why that is and deal with those. Then the last part, I'll talk about the nitty-gritty of democratic engagement, political parties, candidates, choosing who to vote for, who to support, etc. So as far as I'm aware, it's very original. It's very much based in the Scottish context. And if you're a Christian interested in politics, I'm sure you'd find it a good read. Having said that, if you're also a Muslim or someone of another religion, I think you'd find it a fascinating read, because I would imagine you'd find an awful lot of it. You'd feel, the same applies for the engagement of people of your faith in politics as well. So we're hoping that that book is going to be ready to give out a complimentary copy as well at the conference. Now, currently, apparently, there's massive delays with printers. So instead of taking 2 weeks, it takes 4 weeks to get a book printed. So we're a bit touch and go with that, but we're hoping to have it ready. If it's not quite ready for the day, there'll be one in the post to you very soon after. So in addition to those two books, short books, we've got a series of booklets, 3 booklets we're hoping to publish as well. One about education, one about abortion, one about assisted suicide, and also a whole string of leaflets on all sorts of topics that we think are going to help to communicate the Scottish Family's message to a broader group of people. So we'll have a range of leaflets as well. I won't put a number on it. We're working hard on them at the moment. It's quite a job. But that will be something that will be a significant part of the conference. So you'll go away with your folder with a lot of new publications in it. I say that they're going to be free of charge, just included in the conference fee. So do get your tickets as soon as you can. Right now, our special guest is having a few technical issues at the moment, so we'll let him keep persevering with that. But I'll talk about a few things that have been going on this last week or so. Well, a big thing for the family party, since the summer actually, the sex education, transgenderism in schools, etc. These issues have really been to the fore. So we've been focusing on them a lot. Probably for some people, they'd see those as our sort of main thing, as the thing we're known for, probably, is taking a stand on those issues, revealing what's going on in schools. So there's been a lot going on. So we've been focusing on that very much so. We'll move on to other issues within the coming months. But a big thing's been the launch of the LGBT inclusive education resources, paid for by the Scottish Government, produced by the Thai campaign. I mean, they've got groundbreaking, revolutionary teaching materials like calculate the area of this LGBT rainbow flag. That's the sort of thing. You might have seen my video. I went along to the launch event. It was an online event, and I typed in a few very polite, mild-mannered, challenging questions, asking them if this material was maybe one-sided, if it might alienate pupils with more traditional values. And as you would expect in Scotland, no one would think to debate, to try and argue with you, to try and present a reasoned case why your questions don't make sense, or even, perish the thought, actually try and answer my questions. No, instead, they just deleted me from the meeting. But that's Scottish education for you. So they've produced these sort of second-rate lesson worksheets, etc., for use in schools. There's been article after article in the press, completely positive about it. What a wonderful thing it is. And the people who produced them, they're now claiming that there's been worldwide interest. People from all over the planet are just so desperate to get their hands on maths worksheets that say work out the area of a rainbow flag, because it's so revolutionary. And Scotland really is leading the world in this regard. I mean, it really is quite bizarre. Now, this policy of LGBT inclusive education is nothing new. I mean, it was the idea passed through the Parliament about 3 or 4 years ago. Not a single MSP opposed it. Not one MSP, let alone a party. Not a single MSP said, "Whoa, this is not right. This is indoctrination." Trying to put LGBT content into every subject from 3-year-olds right the way up through school. So none of the MSPs objected to it. So as far as the media are concerned, it's not a controversy. So it just goes ahead without any dissent in the Parliament and in the media. Now, the other thing that's been going on alongside this, you might have seen on social media, is when the government produced its terrible transgender guidance for schools. It had a reading list in it, and it recommended a book called Beyond Magenta, which I won't describe in detail what's in it, but some of the content is quite obviously explicitly about a 6-year-old boy engaging in sexual acts with adult men and saying he enjoys it. Okay, and this was on the recommended reading list produced by the Scottish Government. So the Scottish Government was alerted to that. I think some other people picked up on this as well. We did as well. So they removed it from their document. But then the version of the document on Education Scotland's website has still got it in. So we wrote to Education Scotland saying, by the way, you've got resources promoting paedophilia on your website. Perhaps you'd like to withdraw them. If you could just reply to us, confirming that you've removed them, that'd be great. Of course, they never replied to us. We're the lowest of the low. We're blocked on Twitter. We're just the scum of the earth. We're not worthy of a response. But they did actually remove it at like the afternoon that we'd sent the message in the morning. Now, you would think of the Scottish educational establishment, they would think to themselves, wow, we've really made a mess of this. This is really, really embarrassing. We've got to make sure this doesn't happen anymore. We've got to make sure that this book is removed from every copy of this document that's in existence, because this is so embarrassing. We've got to get this right, people. Hit the panic button, get this sorted. No. So the government were told, they didn't bother telling Education Scotland to update their version. We tell Education Scotland that neither of them bother telling the LGBT inclusive education website to update their version. So they've again republished the version that promotes, recommends this book that's basically paedophilia, a heartwarming tale of paedophilia is the way it reads. I mean, it's just quite bizarre, but that's the situation that we are in. Now, some things about the transgender guidance as well. There's been a bit of pushback against it from one of the teachers' unions. There's the Scottish Secondary Teachers Association. Now, what they've done is they've come back and said, this places teachers in a very difficult situation, because pupils are going to come, share this information, then the teachers are going to be really worried. They're going to be vulnerable. If they don't pass that information on to other teachers, to the school management, to the parents, the teachers are feeling very vulnerable. But the guidance says that they only tell who the pupil wants them to tell, because it's not a well-being concern. If it's a well-being concern or a child protection concern, you have to pass it on. But they say it's not. And the teachers are saying, no, we don't want this pressure. This puts us in a really difficult situation. Now, that is entirely right. The teachers are absolutely right that it does put them in a difficult situation. But the sad thing is that that's the issue that makes the news, whereas the more fundamental issue of the way this is going to tear families apart and the way it's going to wreck the lives of young people on a huge scale, that doesn't really get the same attention. But it does from us. Just one last point on this type of topic before I introduce our guest, who is now in the waiting room, so to speak. Now, the other thing was, I was talking to someone yesterday, a retired teacher, and they were saying that they used to deal with pastoral issues. They're quite a senior member of staff. And sometimes a girl would come along pregnant, and what the school staff had to do was basically provide the contact details for the local abortion service. So that's what the school would do, and the girl, in some cases, would go and have an abortion. But she wouldn't tell her parents. And then that teacher said she would sometimes then find herself talking with the parents of a girl who'd had an abortion. And the parents would be saying, oh, our daughter, we don't know what's wrong with her. She's just not herself. We're really worried about her. What do you think? And the teacher has to sit there knowing that this girl's had an abortion the week before, but the teacher cannot say to the parents, because that would be against the rules in Scotland. So the teacher has to sort of play dumb and play along with the parents as though it's a complete mystery why the girl is so upset. I mean, what a state of affairs that is. So just bear in mind when you're when you're talking to teachers in a school, if your child's 12 or over, that might be the situation. Maybe it's relatively unlikely, but it might be the situation that the teachers actually know what's really going on with your child, but they're not telling you. They're not telling you. I mean, this is completely wrong. And as a Scottish Family Party, we would sort it out. Which other party do you hear talking about these things? None, of course, but that's our job. Filling the void in Scottish politics, picking up on the issues that the other parties are not interested in. But they're crucial issues. Right now, I'm delighted to say our special guest is ready and waiting. Now, a few weeks ago, we had Andrew Owen, leader of Destiny Church, on the live stream for a fascinating chat. And he told us about some of the legal freedom of speech challenges that the church was facing. And there have been a lot of developments on that front, to say the least. He's got quite a tale to tell. So I'm delighted that Andrew is here. So welcome, Andrew. It's great to have you back again.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm glad everything's working technically. I was worried you might come on and it wouldn't be.
Few challenges, but we made it in the end.
Well, loud and clear. Great. It's great to have you again. Well, this is part 2, really, isn't it? Because you set the scene last time.
Yes.
There's a lot of news since then. I mean, shall we start back at the beginning? Do you want to start the story with the Usher Hall and with the Franklin Graham event as well?
Well,
quickly.
It seems like so much has happened, doesn't it, since we last spoke about this? But it's been hugely important. Our story is that we had booked the Usher Hall, a publicly owned conference facility by the City of Edinburgh Council, for our annual conference, which we call Search. And everything was progressing normally. We'd used the Usher Hall previously. We had no issues or concerns as far as we were aware. And then, without warning, they cancelled our booking. And we found out about the cancellation, not from the Usher Hall, but from the Times newspaper. It appeared in the Times on a Friday morning, I think it was. And then 2 hours later, we got a call from the Usher Hall to saying that what we just read in the paper was actually true. So they had cancelled our booking, a Christian conference, on the grounds of one complaint that they had received, although they're not confirmed that, we know it was one complaint. And the complaint was about one of our keynote speakers, an American guy who back in 2010, I think it was, wrote a book about several matters. And in that book, he expressed his opinion quite strongly about marriage being between one man and one woman. And so they took that to be homophobic. Therefore, we must all be homophobic. Therefore, the conference must be homophobic, and we deserve to be cancelled. And so that's what they went to do. We then thought that completely irrational and reasonable. Firstly, the conference was nothing to do with that particular subject. The guy who was coming to speak was not speaking about that subject. But of course, the opinions he shared were the opinions of all Christians and probably Muslims as well, and many other people. We tried to reason with the management of the Usher Hall, but they were adamant, they were having none of it. They then agreed that they would reinstate our booking if we cancelled our speaker, which we thought completely unreasonable. We pointed out that they were, we had rights and they were violating our rights, and they were arguing on the grounds of diversity and inclusion, but we were excluded in their inclusion policy, so they said. We then had to engage legal advice and legal counsel, and our first approach with that was, please try to reason with the Usher Hall. We really don't want to take this any further, but they were having none of it, and so we sued them. And the court action started. It was delayed slightly because of COVID and the shutdown of the courts and so on. But eventually it got into the courts. They had first tried to argue that simply on the basis of a contractual arrangement. Of course, they'd broken our business contract, and they were claiming that was our, that's what this argument is all about. And we said, we're not interested in the business contract, although you violated it. We are interested in our human rights and our free ability to have free speech, to think what we want to think and say what we want to think, just like everybody else. We don't want any special preference or preferential treatment. We just want to be treated like everybody else. So it ended up all the way in the courts in Edinburgh, and I'm glad and delighted to say that we won. And we got a full written apology, a formal declaration from the council that any Christians could use their facilities both now and on into the future. And so we feel that that was a victory for us as Destiny churches, but also we think it was a really important victory for all Christian churches up and down the country. And it kind of set a milestone there. We hope it's all working out as we had planned. That's the intention going forward. But we all know the big pressures and challenges that the Christian community is presently under.
I mean, that was amazing, an amazing victory. I was so delighted. I mean, I spoke to so many people who were just over the moon at this victory that the council had been. You hear so many bad news stories on this sort of front, but to hear one coming to this sort of end was absolutely fantastic.
Sorry. Right at the end, of course, they took it right to the 11th hour before finding any kind of sense and sensibility in it, and threatened us with all kinds of things, including their pockets were much bigger than our pockets and all of those kind of arguments.
Yeah. I mean, that's a terrible side of legal cases, isn't it? When you're against the government or the Equality and Human Rights Commission or whatever, they can just spend and spend taxpayers' money, and the risk means nothing to them. But poor old us, it's quite a risk.
It's a real unfortunate thing that all of their costs were covered by the taxpayer, and we had to find our own. Fortunately, we won, and they had to pay. But that again was the taxpayer, of course.
Now, do you think you were sort of a bit lucky with the judge? Do you think it might have gone the other way with another judge, or do you think it was just so clear cut that they were doomed?
Well, I think there was never any doubt that the law was on our side, and when the event happened, we were still under EU law, and the EU law protected us. The UK law was crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
UN Declaration of Human Rights was crystal clear, but the law had never really been tested.
Mm-hmm.
But right up until the last moment, it really was brinkmanship, because we could have lost on a technicality.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been right in principle, and the law was on our side, but technically it was possible to lose.
Uh-huh.
That was always the risk.
Yeah. I find when we book things, quite often the contract has some small print that says something like, we can cancel this for whatever reason we like, whenever we like. Was there anything like that, or was that overruled by the judgment?
Well, because of the way they broke the contract, we obviously had a business contract with them,
mm-hmm.
And they are entitled to cancel that contract, but only under certain circumstances. But of course, we read about the cancellation in the newspaper. They never informed us properly, never mind giving us any contractual notice, anything like that.
Yeah.
But the small print only said if we were causing some kind of disturbance at the actual event itself, or we were saying something that was so inflammatory, we were going to have the city of Edinburgh up in a riot. The small print that says that kind of a thing, but that was never our intention or anything like that had any chance of happening.
Yeah. I find these big organizations, councils, whatever, they don't seem to make any efforts to take the initiative and check who's booking. They'll just take the booking, and then it just takes one complaint to light the blue touch paper, and suddenly they'll swing into action. So they haven't got their own critical faculties to apply and say, all right, Destiny Church, who are they? Let's check that out. Let's decide for ourselves. There's none of that at all. But then just one person complains, and they suddenly go into panic mode, and the whole thing blows up. And that's my experience of lots of other institutions as well. They don't think for themselves. They just get triggered by a complaint.
And very, very often, as was in our case, there were two other things that were happening. One was the actual person responsible in the management room. They made no upward reference to the, others above them. They just made a carte blanche decision.
Right. And
as far as I'm aware, that person is no longer there. But that happens too long. If you have someone who's, I'll put it like this, anti-Christian or pro somebody else, then they become a cause fighter in a regular job, and you become the victim. And I think that's a bit of what happened here. But this is one of the things that concerns me at the moment, is that cancellation happened in a crest of a wave that was happening across the UK.
Yeah.
Because the same period, Glasgow City Council had cancelled the Franklin Graham event at the Hydro, and many other places up and down the country had cancelled Franklin Graham. So we were perceived and pitched as of the same temperament, same people, same everything. So the wave that was going through the country caught us up in it. I think that we will never know, of course, but if that was already not happening, then potentially, possibly, we might have got some sense out of them, but we didn't, because, well, the whole country's against you, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, the media can portray things like that. Opinion can appear to be like that. But I don't think that's actually the way the country thinks. We had all kinds of people offer us support, including the chair of the Secular Society and many other people who say, we don't agree with anything you believe, but we believe you have the right to say it and certainly think it. We had all kinds of people stand with us, support us, send us a little bit of money in the journey. And I think it was interesting for me to find out how many folks who weren't in my Christian camp who still felt the same way that I felt about things.
Yeah, we've got some very encouraging comments here. Let's have a look. Hello, Josh. Right, a long time no see. Good to hear from you.
Hi, Josh.
Pockets. Brian, stand fast, will not be moved. Awesome. Neil, awesome victory for us all. Well done. Greetings and support from Ireland, likewise.
Hey.
With us. Now, I was going to ask about the Franklin Graham cases. I picked up a bit of news about those, because there were cancellations around the country.
Yes.
I mean, what's the big picture there? What's happened in Glasgow?
As far as I understand it, part of that case is ongoing. And part of it they've lost, and it looks like the rest of it they could win. The difference between the Franklin Graham case in Glasgow and our case in Edinburgh is a very important distinction to make. The Usher Hall is a publicly owned facility, and the law on publicly owned facilities is much stronger than private limited companies.
Mm-hmm.
The SECC company is technically a limited company, albeit 95% owned by Glasgow City Council. But technically, a limited company has a choice, or has a limited choice to choose to provide services or not. But a publicly owned entity does not.
Mm-hmm.
So the Usher Hall and Edinburgh City Council didn't have a leg to stand on whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
There is a slight argument that could be argued because of who owns the building.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a great victory in Blackpool. I guess you heard about that one.
Yes, yeah.
And that was over bus advertising. Where
I missed that one. Right, tell me about that. What was that?
That was a great victory, and that was also a great victory for all us Christians up and down the country, not just in Blackpool and England. But Franklin Graham had an event in Blackpool. It was advertised on the side of buses. The LGBTQ community complained about the adverts, and the council made the bus company pull down the ads, saying that they were causing a public disturbance and so on. So that all went to court. The judge ruled very strongly in favor of Franklin Graham, the Billy Graham Association, and passed a damning report on the city council there, saying that they only considered, and this is an important point, they only considered a tiny fraction of their community, when as a council, they had a responsibility to consider all of their community. Mm-hmm. If that was heard up and down the country, there'd be fairness for us all, I think.
Yeah. Now, I was there with these victories based on human rights. I always have the concern that even though the rights might be interpreted in a sensible way that produces the right result now, I'm not so convinced in the longer term that the same rights might still protect. So for example, to illustrate, the same rights now, if your speaker had been coming out with the genuinely most offensive and outrageous views you could possibly imagine, then it might be that the judge would have said, look, there's actually good reason. That there is a good argument why these views are going to be damaging to Edinburgh. And we would probably agree that there would be some views that we think, right, we don't want this in the Usher Hall. And that's quite a subjective decision. So as time goes by, how long will it be until that traditional Christian teachings become even more firmly regarded as beyond the pale and classified with the most outrageous sort of beliefs we can imagine? And then these human rights will sort of stop working, if you like. They're a bit hit and miss already. I would say that would be my fear.
And the strange thing was about the Usher Hall, we had a look at who else they had the few months before us, and who else was coming to the Usher Hall a few months after us. And they had the most outrageous, cross-dressing comedians who said the most outrageous things. I mean, totally obnoxious things and offensive to huge sections of society.
Yeah.
Nothing was said about them. My concern is that just for believing the Bible, just having a basic, simple Christian belief, that view in itself will be outlawed. And we're seeing some of those things in places like Helsinki in Finland, with one of their politicians could go to jail for quoting the Bible verse.
That was a shocking tale.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, if you look at schools, I mean, you say about like the sort of outrageous drag artists. I mean, we've highlighted a few cases where outrageous drag artists have been invited into schools to perform for pupils. I think it's not unusual at all for drag artists to go and do makeup workshops for pupils in schools, or to go and read stories for them. So that's already regarded as mainstream. Whereas, obviously, if a teacher were to say in a school some traditional aspects of Christian belief, they'd be finished. I mean, I was very nearly finished for saying something quite mild outside school.
Yeah.
So I think like the bar's always moving.
Yeah.
I feel that the traditional beliefs are getting more and more demonized.
But do you know, I think, Richard, I've got lots of friends, right, who are they're not Christians. But I've got loads of friends who would have the same sympathy, who think those things are outrageous themselves.
Yeah.
But they feel, this is the sad thing to me, right? They're not Christians, they don't come to our church, some of them are business people, some of them doing other things, but they feel that they can't speak up their own views anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm finding many, many people like that. I wouldn't say that's a minority even. But there is
I absolutely agree.
There's such a loud voice with a minority about certain things that everybody else is threatened and bullied into silence.
Yeah. I think it's a particular issue in Scotland.
I agree.
I've had so many conversations with people in the family party, and I'll say, you would just be such a great candidate in the next election. You've got what it takes. You'd be fantastic. How about it? And they say, I would love to. I would really love to. But I work for the NHS. I'm a teacher. I'm a social worker. I work for another big company that could go wrong. Or I'm doing a course at the moment, and I'm going to need to be applying for professional registration. I volunteer at a charity. Or it might even be, some circle of friends might reject them. Or it might be that they're up for it. They're thinking, right, I'm going to do it. But their partner, wife or husband, might say, I just don't want to take this risk. We need your income. You might be up for this huge risk. I'm really not up for that, which is quite reasonable. But it is a huge section of society. So the government's got its influence extends so widely with regard to cultural issues that, like you say, there are most people who feel under pressure one way or another. So we find when it comes to election time, I mean, retired people are often in the clear. I mean, they're not going to stop your pension for not. Mind you, the Nazis did it. If you didn't sign up to the Nazi party or say a statement supporting them, then they'd stop your pension. But we're not in that state yet. So people who retired are in the clear. I mean, often people who are doing, if you're a plumber, you've got your own little plumbing business, well, you're pretty safe. You're not going to get struck off as a plumber for saying the wrong thing about transgender issues or something. But then there's a huge range of other people in employment who are just feeling the pressure, are feeling restrained.
And sadly,
yes, it's a huge problem.
We've got lots, unfortunately, I have lots of stories from within our churches of professional people, consultants in the NHS, teachers in school, who have, I know of 2 consultants who've been suspended because they prayed with someone and it was the patient requesting the prayer. And others who've been penalized with promotions and threatened with all kinds of issues simply because of their faith.
Yeah.
So that's a very real challenge.
Right, Stuart, right, you're on. Email chairman@scottishfamily.org. You'll be a council candidate next year. chairman@scottishfamily.org. You're on. Okay, so the Franklin Graham case in Scotland is sort of ongoing. Have there been victories in England on it? I thought I'd heard of some.
The only one that I'm fully aware of.
Right.
COVID delayed lots of court cases, and ours was delayed by about 6 months because of COVID. So I know there's a backlog with various things.
I sometimes find it's astonishing how ignorant people seem to be of the sort of doctrines of the Christian church, or the catechism of the Catholic Church, or whatever, because they think they find someone who disapproves of same-sex marriage or thinks homosexual relationships are immoral or whatever, and they really think they've found some crazy lunatic off on the fringe somewhere. They don't realize that this is mainstream Christian belief, and it is just ignorance. But then on the other hand, part of me thinks, well, it's sort of understandable because they hardly ever hear Christians or churches saying those things. And if every church was speaking about, making statements on these things quite routinely, then I'm sure the council would realize the situation that they're facing.
I think the challenge is, of course, churches want to be inclusive, and we as a movement of churches, and most Christians that I know, are certainly not homophobic. The Bible commands us to love everybody, but we have an instruction from God as this is the way we ought to live, and this is the life that God would have us live. But here's the strange thing, right? There's 195 countries in the world officially recognized. There's 205 if you don't, if you include Taiwan and places like that. When I checked last, out of the 195 official countries, only 27 had legalized same-sex marriage.
Right.
But everybody thinks it's everywhere on the planet, right? But it's actually still a tiny minority of the planet.
Yeah.
But when you live in your bubble, whoever shouts loudest in that bubble makes that the norm, don't they?
Yeah. And the BBC will do a good report on every nation that introduces same-sex marriage. But I mean, quite a few have had referenda and rejected it. That doesn't get a BBC report.
No.
That's
ignored.
Exactly. Gives the impression it's a one-way street.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, the person they had as head of religious affairs for the BBC has just got into a lot of trouble over his Princess Diana report, hasn't he? Well, I could say a lot about the BBC. God bless the people who work in it.
Yeah, I mean, the family party policy on the BBC basically says within the idea of a national broadcaster, it's great, to produce high quality content that's focused on the nation, that brings people together, unite around common values. Just that potentially it's great, but it's just so far gone, and the chronic bias is so ingrained that it seems irredeemable.
Yeah, it's a long time. The BBC News is my last on the watch list. But I think the same challenge is with social media, isn't it? And with all the big tech giants in the world, who Facebook is outing lots of Christians at the moment. Lots of Christian platforms are being shut down, while at the same time promoting all kinds of other nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, we've had our issues with all of them, actually. Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Facebook restricted our page. I mean, at one point, I don't know if you saw this, if you went to like the Scottish Family Party page on Facebook, a message would come up saying, "Are you sure?"
No, I hadn't seen that.
You say, "Are you sure? But please have a look at the sort of material they post before you like the page." I mean, Twitter, we used to bounce off a ceiling. It's about I think it was 2000 for a while. So you go towards it, then it would drop right down again. Then you go towards it, would drop right down again. It would just bounce up and down like that. But with YouTube, we've had some videos taken down as hate speech. Facebook's done the same as well. Sometimes we appeal and they change it. Sometimes we appeal and it doesn't change. Recently, though, it hasn't been so bad. A few months ago, during the election campaign, for example, it was probably at its worst. But it's not too bad at the moment. But I tend to think, in terms of social media, we're not in danger of being chopped, I don't think. Because I think there's a lot more outspoken and controversial channels than ours still in action. But you never know. You're just completely at their mercy. I mean, our Facebook page has got 10,000 likes. So that's a lot of work gone into that. But it just dangles by a thread. Yeah. And the day that some intern at Facebook decides that they don't like it, then
that's it.
That could be it. Down the drain. But it was fascinating during the election campaign. They restricted the reach of our page. So they wouldn't show our page to as many people as would normally see it. And you had to, it said, "Are you sure?" if you went to like it. At the same time, they're sending messages saying, "Do you want to spend money advertising your page?"
Good gracious.
So it's against their principles. We're so evil that they didn't want to show our page to people. But if we pay them, well, that's fine. Well, they'll show it to as many people as like if they get money out of it.
Good.
I mean, they really are, impeccable moral credentials there.
Yeah. We work extensively in India, and a part of India which is heavily persecuted. And I had several death threats from a radical Hindu group on Twitter, blatant death threats.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they were doing it, but they were tracking my movement around the world. And so I and others made a formal complaint to Twitter, and Twitter said, just be reasonable. That was their response to me. And I was the one getting the death threats. We have said something clearly Christian. We're very unreasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
My theory with the social media, and partly I think it's that they're stuff full of employees who genuinely do have very progressive views. But then the other side of it is that they're huge multinational American corporations that are making a fortune. And they're a bit worried that the anti-globalization, anti-capitalist protesters will come and break their windows. But the way to keep these people on side is to be hyper progressive on the issues that don't cost any money.
Okay.
So it's the LGBT. I mean, for a tech company, I mean, climate change is not a big deal because you don't use much energy. So you go for that. You can be hyper feminist. You can go for all these social issues. Say they don't cost you much money. Yeah, and I think it's to ward off the anti-capitalist demonstrators to keep people on side, basically. I'm almost sure that's the case, and it works.
I've got a far simpler philosophy on it. The Bible tells us that our battle isn't against flesh and blood, but dark forces, and I think dark forces are very interested in big powers.
Yeah. I would agree with that on a personal note, not Scottish family party policy, but yeah, I would hold to that sort of idea as well. Now, there's a few other things been in the news recently. I thought I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on a few of these as well. So if it's okay, I'll fire away with a few of them.
Yeah.
I mean, a big thing in the news has been the fact that 12 to 15-year-olds are being offered the coronavirus vaccination without parental consent. And there's been quite a bit of pushback against that. People are thinking, wow, what's going on here? Whereas we're wanting to say, this has been the law for like 30 years. 12-year-olds make their own decisions and it can be kept secret. But a lot of people have woken up to that. What's your take on that? Have you been following that story at all?
Yeah. As a parent and as a grandparent now, I think that what seems to be a growing trend against parental authority is a deep concern to me, especially when the kids are not making a neutral decision. They're making a heavily politicized, manipulated decision. And so at least most parents would bring have a look at the other side, think of it this way, bring a balanced view. I'm personally deeply concerned about that. And I think you are right in that these things have been happening, but most of us haven't been aware of it until something like this crops up. We're constantly encouraging our family and parents we know around the churches and so on to be as informed as possible about what's being said and done in their schools, because most parents have no idea what's been said and done in the classroom or what's been done in the school. I think when I saw Sahid Javid come out he was interviewed one day on the news about that decision to allow kids to be vaccinated without parental consent. He seemed almost embarrassed to admit that's exactly what he was saying. And I think in their core values, they have a problem with that.
I mean, there's children's rights are the flavour of the century in Scotland. Everything's going to be based on children's rights. What children's rights often amount to is it's not really giving the rights to children. It's pushing the parents out, but then the influence goes to professionals.
Yes.
Because children don't make their own mind up about things. They're influenced very heavily by who's around them. So it's the professionals that gain the power while the parents are being disempowered. I think that's exactly what's happening here.
And heavy integration takes place, and they try to raise up a whole army of their own political ideologues to push their agenda going forward, aren't they? And I think that is what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Something else was in the news. Moves in Scotland to make it so that under 25s are to be rehabilitated rather than punished for crimes, because the idea is that under 25s, their brains are not fully developed. So they should be given this extra leeway and not so much treated as criminals as treated as people who've made a mistake, need a bit of treatment just to help them see the error of their ways. So it's, I mean, this hasn't raised the age of criminal responsibility point blank. There's a sort of step in that direction. That up to 25, you're only sort of semi-responsible for your actions. Did you see that one?
I didn't see that one, but I've been watching with interest other things to do with the criminal justice system, including the policies of drugs and so on.
Oh yeah, that's next on my list. Yeah.
And my first response in all of that is, of course, if you're telling a 12-year-old he can choose to have a vaccine and he's mature enough to do that, you can't tell a 25-year-old he's not mature enough to commit a crime.
Exactly.
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I have huge problems with the criminal justice system. I think it's biased. I think it's unfair. I think it does not help rehabilitate people. Huge percentages of people go on to recommit and reoffend. And the truth is, so many people who've ended up in the prison system have nothing when they come out. There's no support. There's no real help. There's nobody to help them get going again. And too many Christian things are so attacked that we have to fight just to keep standing to offer what we offer for them. And I think there does need to be a root and branch review of that whole system.
Does your work take you into prisons at all? Have you spent much time in visiting prisons?
I have over the years. Yeah, I have some very funny stories to tell from prison work. I used to work in a top security prison. And the first time I went in there, they took me to the depths of this prison and locked me in with about 40 inmates, all alone, with no warden or guard. Some amazing things happened in there. And we're now involved with Prison Fellowship, and we've got some great stories around our churches, people who've had a God encounter whilst in prison and their lives are transformed. And I think God has a big heart and a passion for not only the people in prison, but their families who pay the price just as much as they do.
Yeah. Well, I haven't been into prison a huge amount of time, but I have been in maybe 4 or 5 times, a couple of times in Edinburgh, relatively recent, to visit someone. But it is quite an experience going through all the security. Now, I think sometimes I tend to think, 3 years in prison, that's not very long. Maybe that's right for some really serious crimes. But on the other hand, when you go and visit, I do always come away thinking to myself, I really would not like that at all. That would be a pretty severe punishment. Even if there was, a pool table and a telly or whatever, I would. I don't think I'd be very happy.
But you got your own mobile phone in Scotland, haven't you? You can phone your own drug supply.
Yeah. Well, I think in Scotland it's the same philosophy in schools. It's right the way through. They don't really hold people morally responsible. If someone does something wrong, there was some reason why they did it. It's not really their fault. There was some reason. If you can just get to the bottom of the reason, then everything will be sorted out. I mean, there's some truth in that. It's not entirely untrue. There's something in that. But on the other hand, people have got to be held responsible for what they do. That's part of rehabilitation, I think, is recognizing that you did something wrong, recognizing that a punishment was deserved. And but I think in prison, there should be really intensive, positive rehabilitation activity. I just think it's maybe quite hard to put on. It's expensive. It needs a lot of people. It's a real challenge. Yeah.
We've done all kinds of stuff in prisons, but we find the weekends are the hardest point to do anything because they're basically locked up in their cells for 2.5 days with very little staff in the prisons, and so they can't have you in because they've got nobody to look after you while they bring you in. Even though so many people like us are offering things for free to help, they're not picked up on very often. But big need there, huge need.
Yeah. I'm just remembering when I was on the Isle of Wight, I do a bit of amateur magic. I went and did a magic show in a prison at one
You
time.
don't have many talents, Richard.
Well, let me finish my story. It was the worst magic show I ever did. Everything went wrong. There was this trick where you put two apparently empty glasses together and then shake them, and all this liquid appears in them. So I did it and said, look, the glasses are empty, and something burst or something, and the water went flying over one of them. Then there was another trick that you say, pick a color, and the trick relies on the person not saying black, because no one ever says black when you pick a color. So I did it in this prison. I got this volunteer, plus a mass murderer or something. Pick a color, black. I said, no, just another color. No, black. I want black. Stuck to it. Okay, that was a nightmare. I'm not going to sleep tonight now. That's being brought back to me. So, right. Other things that have been in the news. There's the drugs issue. There's been moves towards not punishing people, just warning people, even for possession and use of Class A drugs. Some people are saying this is, it's bypassing the political system, as often happens in Scotland.
Yes.
The law sort of effectively changes, but the letter of the law doesn't change. But the way it's interpreted and applies, it's changed dramatically, but it doesn't quite become a public debate. So that was an interesting issue. Now, I'm sure you'll have had experience dealing with people with addictions of various sorts over the years. So what's the way forward, in your view?
Well, I might be controversial in this, but I think criminalizing drug use is pointless. Because no matter how much you criminalize the actual use of drugs, you're never going to stop it. And then there's this huge industry that goes on behind it. And then, of course, the crime that's attached to it when people need to get the next fix and so on. I think much crime is caused because of that. And we allow so many other things to happen in our society which are damaging, but we don't think anything about criminalizing them. And so I'm probably on the whole about decriminalizing drug use in that sense. Lots of discussion that you can have about it. It's a bad idea. It damages lives. Addiction is a terrible thing. I was in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital just last week, and I was shocked. I mean, I was absolutely shocked by the number of young people I saw as amputees. I mean, they were everywhere. Lost legs because of drugs. It actually impacted me powerfully when I saw it. They were just walking about the place, and you think, this is a pandemic that nobody's really talking about very much. Young people losing limbs because of drug use.
Mm-hmm.
Drug use is a sad thing and a negative thing, but criminalizing it and sending them to prison for it, I'm not sure is a great idea.
Do you think? Would you be for the criminal approach if it worked, if it did genuinely really restrict supply to the point where there just wasn't a free and available supply of drugs in most communities? Would you think it was the way to go down if it seemed to work like that? Or do you not think it's the way to go down because it doesn't seem to work?
I think probably the latter.
Uh-huh.
I think you can't criminalize certain behavior because it's intrinsic to human nature. And I think there are alternative routes to take, including there are reasons why you're using drugs. There's other options in life. I think engaging with people about that conversation, allowing it to be more open, would be far more beneficial. One of the other things that surprises me lately is the number of very middle-class, professional and wealthy people who are drug takers and drug users.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. If we imagine the thrill seeker, basically, so this is not someone whose life's fallen to bits, who's got a really difficult backstory. They're just a thrill seeker. They've tried lots of other things. That their mates have told them that drugs are great. So they decide to give it a go. And that might result in, very quickly, it might result in them being involved in violence or a very serious accident or they might start a fire or whatever. So there could be really negative consequences for other people as a result of that decision. My view would be that the message to that person needs to be that our society says it's not okay for you to choose to risk however many other people by losing control of your life, basically, through drugs. And also there's the cost thing as well. So if that person decides to take drugs, thrill seeking, they might end up addicted, and then the rest of society has to foot the bill in terms of policing and rehabilitation, medical care. And my point would be to say to him that the rest of society hasn't consented to that. They haven't agreed that they're willing to sort of subsidize this activity. That's why they're made illegal. So I'd worry if drugs were made illegal, I think surely the amount of use would increase because some people wouldn't be deterred from experimenting.
I'm not sure. I think when you say no about something, you want it all the more. And the interesting thing is, like, smoking is not illegal, but in the last few years, the number of young people smoking has fallen dramatically and drastically because the Gen Zs are deeply concerned about their health. Yeah. My youngest son is in that generation. Out of 5 kids, he's the only one who will read the ingredients on a tin before he opens it. And it's like, I've not seen any of my other kids, but his generation are concerned about what's in the food, what it's made, how it's made. So less of them are smoking for that reason. And I think drugs could potentially, if it's not illegal and the thrill of that is gone, then they'll start looking at other factors. I think there will always be the people who are desperately needy. One of the other things that shocked me, a few years ago, I worked in a top security prison, went in there quite a lot, full of lifers, serious crimes. They were all old people, 60s and over. More recently, been a Kilmarnock prison, serious crimes, they're all young people, early 20s. And when you talk to them, this is what shocked me also, many of them were in there for murder. None of them had any recollection of committing that murder.
Right, yeah.
No recollection of killing anybody. They were stoned when they did it. They were out of their face when they did it. Yeah. So the drastic, the challenging, damaging destruction that drug use does, there is no doubt. And
I think it's something like 2/3 of people in prison were under the influence of alcohol at the time they committed the crime.
I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Just going back to the smoking thing, I think that's a very interesting issue. If you go to a school, if you go to their lesson on smoking, what you'll get is, doctor will come in or something. They'll have some pictures of like caked up lungs, all black, and they'll just have horror stories. And the message will be basically that this has got a good chance of killing you and making you really, really ill. So just don't do it. Okay, it's a really bad thing to do. Really straight down the line. Then if you go next week, when the lessons about other drugs, cannabis, heroin, cocaine, all those sort of things, the message will more be, well, we're not here to tell you what to do. It's up to you. They are illegal. But, if you are going to take them, drink lots of water with it. It's like the tone totally changes. And I've heard some people say that they think smoking's that's something like old people do. That's old fashioned. I mean, everyone agrees smoking is really bad. Just don't do it. But drugs, the other drugs, that's still got a bit of
kudos with it.
Yeah, sort of a bit more fashionable rebellion about it. And the message in schools is much more, it's up to you to make your own choice rather than a straight down the line message. So I would think education should reflect the sort of approach they have with smoking. Take a similar sort of approach with drug use, because the dangers are there to pass on.
I would say the same thing about pornography and some of the education that goes along with transgender, sex education, all of that. People like me who are pastoring folks, counseling people for a living, we're picking up damage at the other end of what pornography has done to marriages and lives. I mean, it's utterly destructive and destroys people. And they hear none of that. That's the truth of the matter.
I think often with these issues, when people are sort of dabbling in the early stages, their approach to people who are saying this is not a good idea is just, you're judgmental, you're old-fashioned, stop trying to tell me how to live my life, you're just trying to spoil the fun or whatever. A really hostile response. But then, like you say, 20 years down the line, it can be completely different. In some cases, it can be complaining that there aren't enough support services for people in my situation. It's really tough, the situation I find myself in. But I would say a lot of traditional moral teaching, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about putting people on a path that's going to avoid a lot of these dangers. And it's going to lead them to flourish throughout their lives.
That's it. And most people, human nature has some addictive element to it. You see, it's so easy to get addicted onto anything whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we need to understand sometimes our own human weakness. We need God in our lives to break the power.
Mm-hmm. Well, time has passed. It was a great discussion again. I really enjoyed talking to you tonight, hearing your thoughts. So, till next time. It'd be great to have you back on the show in a few months to talk about some other issues. Hopefully, there won't have been another freedom of speech challenge. We can just talk about some other issues in the news. But
peace is what we want for a while now.
Great. Right, great to have you on the show, Andrew. Thanks a lot.
Thanks
good night. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for your comments.
All the best. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.